My name is Ted Nyman. I'm an engineer at GitHub. As James noted, we host source code, and I guess what else we do? We go around and give talks, I guess. So that's what I'm doing today. I'm going to be talking about happiness, and I'm going to probably get fairly philosophical at certain points. I'm going to start with this premise, which is that working life generally kind of sucks, and one of the reasons it sucks is because it's inauthentic. And I mean inauthentic in a fairly deep sense, which is that we don't really, the relationships that we oftentimes have at work, I mean, we work for different reasons. The main reason that I think most of us work is because we have to eat and drink and so forth, and so, you know, we have to make money, and so from this premise begins our working lives, right? But most of us have worked in companies that have, you know, managers and administrators and hierarchy. And I don't know, you know, maybe we've all probably had different sorts of relationships with managers. I've never really had, I personally have never had a manager where I ever felt like the relationship was particularly authentic. It might have been good, like we might have gotten along, and like, you know, we went to drinks every once in a while, and we talked about, you know, the San Francisco baseball team or something like that, and so forth. And maybe we had a project that worked, but there was very little in any of those relationships that ever felt like it was anything beyond, you know, it was not a real thing, right? It was this sort of artificially created working relationship. It was not authentic, and in context, I never felt like I was really in an authentic, actual, I wasn't my actual self, right? Sort of what authenticity is all about. So there's Philip Larkin. I put him here because I like Larkin's poetry. Also, I'm in England, so I assume that some people may actually know who he is. In America, no one would know. And this is actually a quote that I think he wrote in a letter to his longtime companion about, you know, work being this miserable sort of thing. And so one of the things that happens is because we can't fundamentally change how the structures that are in place, or most of us can't, one of the things we do is we give perks to employees. So does anyone work at Google here before I say anything? Okay, cool. So, so forget Google. What's a defunct company that I can talk about? Digital, DEC is gone, digital. So digital, assume they were a company, but imagine they weren't digital. Imagine they were actually based in Mountain View, and they made a search engine. Imagine they were them. So digital, digital offers all these really nice perks, and there are things like, you know, gyms that have like, you know, rowing equipment, like the Concept 2, I think is a cool thing to have, right? They have like daycare. If you don't like your child, they'll basically take care of your child 24 hours a day, so you don't have to do anything, really. So these are all perks, right, that you get. But I don't think those are really, in the end, what makes people happy. So Plato, that dude, had this theory about love. He says that, and I'm going to slightly paraphrase it. Aristotle has similar views. He says, you know, he asks himself, why do you love someone? And I'm going to, again, say, well, why do you love a job? Why do you love a job? Sometimes we talk about, like, properties. Like, oh, I love this person because they're really smart, or they dress really well, or they have their cheek bone structure is really nice, or so forth, right? But there's a problem with that. There's a sort of philosophical problem with that, which is that, like, someone else has better bone structure than my girlfriend, right? And someone else is smarter than my girlfriend, and someone else is nicer, certainly nicer. And no, I'm just kidding. She's hi. No. So, so the problem with this is that there's always someone better, right? So if this theory was true, and the reason you love someone is because they are so nice or something like that, well, there's someone who's nicer, and then theoretically you should probably love that person too, right? So there's something kind of weird about this. That being said, if your significant other asks you why you love them, don't say, like, I love you because I value the relationship that we have, not because you have, don't, like, give a philosophical essay like I would do. But so So applying this again to work is, you know, if you say, why do you love working at Google? And someone says, well, I love working at Google because they have the Concept 2 rower machine or something like that. Well, like, you know, or excuse me, Digital Corporation. Then, you know, another company, like another, you know, I don't know. Give me another defunct company. Hewlett-Packard, are they still around? So Compaq. So Compaq offers a Concept 3 rower or so forth, so why don't I change jobs and go work at Compaq or something like that, right? So a better X appears and they're gone. Like, I'm obviously slightly exaggerating, but my point here is that perks are really not deep. They don't really make people happy in any real way. Again, back to Larkin, who was also, by the way, a miserable guy, so don't listen to him on happiness. But you know, you can't make people happy with bread and circuses. You can't build culture with words, which is what I'm about to talk to for the rest of this talk. And what I call freedom gestures, which are things like, you know, work on what you want, you know, for X number of hours a day, or something like that, are cool, and it's better than working on something else, but there's something still weird about that, right? It's kind of like, you know, you can go out inside in the sun for 2 hours a day and then go back inside. There's something strange about that, in that it's as if to say, like, your normal work actually isn't that good, so now we're going to let you work on some good work. So it seems like there's something weird there. With, you know, again, it's really more like a perk, right? It's like a freedom perk. It's more like a Concept 2 rower than it is about actually building a culture and a work life that's actually really quite good. So the real way you can do this, and what GitHub has done, the real way that you make people happy is through the actual structures that you have. In the case of GitHub, that's not having managers. We have no managers at GitHub, as you may know, which means quite literally that. I report to no one, which sounds kind of crazy, but it actually isn't. And it isn't for a number of reasons. Mainly, it isn't because everyone that works at GitHub, or not everyone, but most people that work at GitHub have found ways of adapting to a lack of managers that make sure that the managerial roles, right, more like administrative roles, things like hiring, things like, you know, checking if people are happy or not, are actually done by everyone in the company, right? So I think, as James talked about, Ryan Tomeko has talked about this before, that sort of, it's not so much that there's no managers at GitHub, it's more that sort of everyone is a manager, right? And that the functionality of management gets dispersed throughout the company. And that creates an enormously happy group of people because it eliminates usually what makes people very unhappy, which are managers. No offense, there's probably a lot of managers here, so I've probably offended quite a few of you. But imagine if you're a manager, your manager who you don't like, that person, or there's someone on the chain you don't like. They're all gone. There's none of them. And so sort of a lot of that gets eliminated, right? And the culture that we have at GitHub emanates from that. It doesn't emanate from the 2 days a week you're allowed to go outside, right? You can't actually change the culture by giving these culture perks or these freedom perks. It'll never work that way, right? They're nice. I'm not saying they're bad. Like, clearly they're preferable to not having them. But it's not enough if you really, really want to change the working culture, because it is that Concept 2 rower, right? If you offer the gym, maybe people start acting a little healthier, right? Because the equipment is there. But it's very hard to actually change the way people live simply by making these things accessible. It's very hard to change working life without changing the actual fundamental structure that's in place in the organization. So there's the Garden of Eden. The ideal, the utopia that we'd like to think we can eventually get to, is something like this, where the elimination of all of these, rather I should say, the elimination of these, what we think of, or I think of as sort of, even when they're not, but basically onerous burdens that come from management. When you eliminate those things and developers can feel free, they dance around and do this and hopefully build great products. I think we build pretty great products, and we've done it without managers. Here's the problem, though. It's very hard to scale anything like databases, web frameworks, and especially people. People are probably the hardest thing to actually scale. This is us right now. This was actually quite literally right now. I took this an hour ago. So we have 146 people that are in 67 cities right now. I'm one of those cats in England that you can see people are all over. None of these people right now are managers or are reporting to anyone. I know where they are because we have technology that tells us where we are. But literally, so there's an implant. I should tell you, everyone has an implant. That's not true. So here's what we do. We have awkwardness, a lot of awkwardness at GitHub, and it's not your typical, developers are in general very awkward people. In addition to the normal awkwardness that you get in social interactions with developer, we also have like weird interactions where say like, I want to do something and someone else doesn't want to do it. And there isn't a manager to be like, oh, Ted's idea is better, or more in practice, as often is the case, I like Ted more, and so we're going to go with Ted's idea, although of course it won't be said like that. And so this creates a lot of awkward conversations, right? Like how do you resolve problems? And we end up with disorder sometimes, which is frightening. It definitely is scary when people first start at GitHub. Your first week, you'll get, for example, I'm assuming most people kind of know how GitHub works with pull requests, and I'm not going to go into too much of that because people have talked about this a million fucking times before, but you have, pull request-based discussions of determining how things happen, right? So a point is made, a point is made, a point is made. This is bad, I don't like this. Here's code. This is better, okay, this is fine, 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 fine. And you have pull requests that could last for weeks, right? And eventually the determination gets made by code, right? So this is the open source, traditional, rough consensus working code. Sometimes good ideas don't happen because we can't reach consensus. There are many, 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 many good ideas that will never, ever happen at GitHub. And that's part of the trade-off, right? There are also many, many, many bad ideas that will never happen. And that's the good part of the trade-off. But again, there isn't a manager to make that decision. We have teams. Teams form naturally. I was hired, I work mostly on systems and infrastructure stuff. I also maintain, because I was interested in doing it, I maintain our internal office app where we keep track of grocery orders and so forth. It's like a Rails app. I wrote it in like 2 hours because I was bored. But it's good, actually. But no one ever asked me to do it. It was just like, there were people, we had some, what's the Scottish drink that everyone, what is that? Iron Brew. This is a good place to ask that question. So we had people coming in, we had a Scottish employee and then people coming in from the UK, and so we wanted to order that, and it was hard. There was a coordination problem because the office manager didn't. It was a major problem, and it could have cost the company its entire future because we didn't have this. So there was a hysterical moment. So I got like I created this Rails app in like a couple of hours, and then we had a thing that allowed us to track groceries, and everyone was all excited. And then we've always had Earn Brew since, and so everything's fine, and so GitHub still works. By the way, next time there's GitHub downtime, it is probably due to the lack of that beverage, because that's a major problem. But so anyway, point is that, back to that, teams will form naturally in the sense that what you're interested in, you'll start working on. There are problems with this, which is that, like, you can't hire people that are super mercurial. If my interests change every day, I'll probably get nothing done. Also, mercurial, there's a pun for you that picked up on it. So you can't, I like mercurial's fine. You can't hire people that their interests change rapidly. You have to hire people that are at least reasonably consistent. But you can pretty much choose to work on what you want. And again, as you can tell in the tone of my voice, that makes people happy and they end up working a lot. Here's something though really important. You can't just willy-nilly, geez, I've been in England way too many. You can't just go about and do whatever you want at any time, right? There has to be some kind of order. And the way in which this order typically is enforced is through technology. Our deployment, we have a very fairly stringent, not stringent in rules and regulations, but stringent in how our deployment process actually works, which is that you do a branch deploy, you then can deploy, you can then merge into master when it's done. We do all of this through our chat. But the order that we come through is not done through rules, not done through set regulations per se, but it's done by having the technological means, or rather the internal tooling that allows us. So CI, our deployment methods, all of this builds in that necessary structure. It does not come from orders. It doesn't come from, this is how it will be done. It's essentially very difficult to break that structure because the technology is designed in that way, right? You can't really start doing crazy deployment things because we just don't have the technological means. I'm slightly cheating. In an emergency, we can do a bang deploy, but generally, which is deploy bang with an exclamation point. But by and large, the technology is designed to create that order. At GitHub, you can't make anyone do anything. Quite literally, I can't order anyone to do anything. I can't be like, fix this right now. I've never heard anyone really even try to do that. If anyone did, there would be outrage. And so how do you get people to actually do anything, or how do you get consistency, let's say? There was a discussion earlier about concept of IBM. Well, you get consistency by having things that people want to use. So let's say I'm building a new app. We have a set of, let's say, JavaScript behaviors, right? It's called Crema, that is an internal library that is a standard that we use. It's very, very good. And if I'm building a new app, it makes my life very, very easy because I don't have to rewrite everything, right? So my desire to be consistent with the rest of GitHub and the rest of appearances, designs, the stack, largely comes through because we already have the existing stuff that makes it easy, right? This is true in a lot of organizations, a lot of larger organizations, Google/digital corporation, any large corporation that has internal libraries that you can pick and choose. We just try to maintain consistency by having good tooling internally that you'll want to use. Without managers, and like I said earlier about mistakes happen all the time. There's always going to be that thing to say, oh, if we had a manager, this wouldn't have happened. And that's, possibly true, but if we'd had a manager, something bad might have happened, right? So I don't know how you can do that counterfactual. But if you're really super pro manager, you're going to say that all the time, anytime anything goes bad. So you have to accept mistakes. But the trade-off is that you get authenticity in work. Most people that work at GitHub feel like they're doing their life, feel like they're living their life. They don't feel this weird, there's very little faking beyond the normal, mask that we all have to wear in modern Western society. And then autonomy, which I think is really priceless. And consequently, not to sound like a cult leader, because everyone's like GitHub's a cult, blah blah blah. No one's ever quit because no one ever really wants to quit GitHub because you have all of this, right? And so your turnover rate, GitHub's around 500 years. Little League of Shadows kind of shit. So GitHub's been around So GitHub's been around 5 years. No one's ever quit. And it's because of how wonderful all these things are. So really, finishing up, I assume I'm about out, is the meta question. And it's all red, so you know it's super important. Who sets these policies? How are any of these things set? They're set by everyone. And that means pretty much everyone. We have lengthy, sometimes frustrating debates about policy, internal way things are going to work. They go sometimes weeks. Sometimes they'll just die out, and this thing will never get implemented, right? Again, sometimes good things will die, and that's the price you pay. But generally, things do get done. And the reason is because we have this structure, no managers. That creates the culture, and the culture allows everyone to be there. And if I wanted to get all fancy, they could probably move the arrows in a circular way, because the structure comes back. The structure gets reinforced by culture, right? We have this culture, people like the culture, so they're not trying to mess around with the structure. So the weird thing about GitHub, if there's sort of one takeaway that you maybe hadn't thought about, is that although it sounds like I'm talking about all these crazy things, there is this one structure, right? And the power of this culture comes from having this one structure. The structure is in some sense the absence of structure, to continue my philosophical bit. It is the structure in place is that we don't have that kind of managerial roles, right? And so all of the cultural apparatus emerges sort of naturally, right? All of those things that need to be taken care of do get taken care of. If they don't get taken care of, people get upset and complaints. It becomes unpleasant. And then you build the Office app, so Earn Brew comes in and so forth. And so just in closing, a lot of this sounds fairly radical. I presented it in a fairly radical way, and to be blunt, it is pretty radical. It is very, very different. Also, I should temper. I don't actually hate managers. There's plenty of great managers out there. I mean, none come to mind, but there are plenty. I'm sure there have been plenty. Julius Caesar was a great manager. But anyway, so in closing, think about the things. Obviously, not everyone can make radical changes in their organization, but think about ways in which these things are doable. But again, consider the fact that the 20% time maybe isn't enough. It may be a full organizational shift if you really want to do it. And if you're a young startup or something like that, you maybe can do it. There may still be time to save your organizational souls, as it were. So anyway, thanks everybody. I appreciate it.
Thank you. That was perfect. Thank you.